Zara pressed her blue palm against the cool metal wall of the research station and watched the strange human male through the observation window. Her silver eyes studied his movements as he worked on some primitive device in the containment room. The human had been captured 3 cycles ago during a raid on a small transport vessel, and since then, he had been the most puzzling specimen the Valdris Empire had ever encountered. The human called himself Jake, and he was unlike anything in their extensive database of known species. Where most captured beings cowered in fear or raged against their captivity, Jake seemed almost curious about his situation. He asked questions, made jokes that Zara did not understand, and showed a disturbing lack of proper fear toward his captors. Subject: displays unusual behavioral patterns. Zara spoke into her recording device, her melodic voice carrying the typical Valdris accent. Despite being significantly smaller and weaker than Valdris warriors, the human shows no submission responses. Instead, it continues to exhibit what our translators identify as humor and friendliness. Through the speaker system, she could hear Jake humming some human tune as he tinkered with pieces of metal he had somehow fashioned into tools. The security chief had been furious when they discovered Jake had been slowly dismantling parts of his cell to create these crude instruments, but Zara had convinced them to let him continue. She wanted to study this creative problem-solving behavior. Zara was the Empire's leading xenobiologist, standing 7 feet tall with the typical blue-tinted skin and silver hair of her people. Her kind had conquered dozens of worlds and studied hundreds of species. But humans were proving to be an anomaly that challenged everything they thought they knew about inferior races. "Computer, display human physiological readings," she commanded. The holographic display showed Jake's vital signs, and once again Zara found herself confused by what she saw. His heart rate remained steady, his stress hormones were at normal levels, and his brain activity suggested he was actually content. Any other species would be showing signs of terror, despair, or at least resignation by now. Zara made a decision that would have shocked her superiors. She was going to enter the containment room and interact directly with the specimen. Her research had stalled from simple observation, and direct contact might provide the breakthrough she needed to understand human psychology. She walked to the containment entrance and input her access code. The heavy door slid open with a soft hiss, and Jake looked up from his work with those strange brown eyes that seemed to sparkle with intelligence and amusement. "Well, hello there," Jake said, setting down his improvised tools and standing up to face her. "You must be the scientist. I keep seeing through the window. I was wondering when you'd decide to come say hi." Zara felt a strange flutter in her chest at his casual tone. No lesser species had ever addressed her with such informality. She should have been offended, but instead found herself curious about this human's lack of proper protocol. "I am Senior Researcher Zara of the Valdris Scientific Council," she announced, formally. "You will address me with appropriate respect, human." Jake tilted his head slightly, and that mysterious expression humans called a smile spread across his features. "Nice to meet you, Zara. I'm Jake. Thanks for not calling me specimen or subject like the others do. That was getting old pretty fast." The casual way he shortened her title and used her name without permission should have triggered her authority programming. But instead, Zara found herself oddly pleased by the informal address. She had spent cycles being called by her full title and rank, and something about the simple use of her name felt refreshing. "Your behavioral patterns are highly unusual for a captured being," Zara said, attempting to maintain professional distance. "Most species display fear responses when confronted by their captors." "Well, I figure fear isn't going to help me understand my situation or figure out how to improve it," Jake replied with a shrug. "Besides, you folks haven't actually hurt me. Kidnapping aside, you've been pretty decent hosts. The food's weird, but edible, and you gave me materials to work with." This response baffled Zara completely. "You speak of your captivity as if it were a social visit. Do you not comprehend that your species is considered inferior, and you are being held for scientific study?" Jake's expression grew more serious, but not fearful. "I understand the situation perfectly. You're more advanced technologically. You captured me. And now you're trying to figure out what makes humans tick. But here's the thing. Zara. Treating me like a person instead of a lab rat will get you much better data than keeping me isolated and scared. The logic of his statement struck her as surprisingly sound. Zara had been trained to maintain clinical distance from research subjects, but Jake's point about cooperation yielding better results made scientific sense. She found herself sitting down on the simple chair across from where Jake had been working, something she had never done with any other specimen. "Tell me about human mating practices," she said, consulting her datapad for the next research topic. Jake nearly choked on the water he had been drinking. "Wow, jumping right into the personal stuff, aren't we? I mean, that's a pretty complex topic. What specifically do you want to know?" Zara noticed the slight change in Jake's coloration. What her files indicated was called blushing. Human reproduction requires physical contact between males and females, correct? Our scans indicate you possess external reproductive organs that undergo physical changes during arousal. We wish to understand the mechanism. Now Jake's face had turned quite red and he seemed to be struggling with how to respond. "Okay, that's a very clinical way to ask about it. Yes, humans need physical contact to reproduce. And yes, male anatomy changes when we're attracted to someone or thinking about intimate situations." "Demonstrate," Zara commanded, pulling out her scanning device. "Whoa, hold on there," Jake said, raising his hands defensively. "That's not something that just happens on command. It requires emotional connection, attraction, or at least some kind of stimulus." This concept of emotional requirements for biological functions fascinated Zara. Valdris reproduction was a purely clinical process arranged by genetic compatibility algorithms. The idea that emotions played a role in human mating was revolutionary. "What constitutes appropriate stimulus?" she asked, leaning forward with genuine scientific curiosity. Jake studied her face for a moment, and Zara noticed something shift in his expression. His eyes seemed to focus on her features with new intensity, and she detected subtle changes in his breathing pattern. "Well," he said slowly, "humans are attracted to beings they find physically appealing, emotionally compatible, or intellectually stimulating. Sometimes all three." "And you find our species appealing?" Zara asked, purely for research purposes. Jake's gaze traveled over her blue skin, silver hair, and tall frame. "Actually, yeah. Valdris are quite beautiful by human standards, you especially." Zara felt that strange flutter in her chest again, accompanied by what her medical knowledge told her was an increase in her own heart rate. No research subject had ever complimented her appearance before. The sensation was pleasant. "You experience attraction toward me?" she asked, her scientific mind racing with implications. "I'd be lying if I said no," Jake admitted. "You're intelligent, curious, and stunning. Plus, you're the first person here who's treated me like an individual rather than a thing to be studied." Without fully understanding why, Zara reached out and placed her hand on Jake's arm. His skin was warm and soft compared to her own, and she noticed his sharp intake of breath at the contact. "Fascinating," she murmured, watching as Jake's pupils dilated and his breathing became more rapid. "Your physiological responses are quite pronounced." "Zara," Jake said softly, "what you're doing right now, the touching, the closeness, that's definitely stimulus." She looked down and noticed that Jake's anatomy was indeed undergoing the changes her files had described. Her scientific curiosity warred with something else she couldn't identify, a warm feeling spreading through her own body that had nothing to do with research. "Your breeding tool grows when I touch you," she observed with wonder, her clinical language unable to mask her genuine fascination. Jake actually laughed at her phrasing. "That's certainly one way to put it. But Zara, this isn't just a mechanical response. What I'm feeling right now, it's because I'm attracted to you as a person." The concept that physical responses could be tied to emotional connections continued to amaze her. Valdris mating was efficient and purposeful, but Jake was describing something that sounded far more complex and personally meaningful. "Show me more about human emotional connections," she requested, though she was no longer sure if this was for research or personal reasons. Jake moved closer to her on the simple bench, and she could feel the heat radiating from his smaller body. Human connections are built through communication, shared experiences, trust, and physical contact. We bond with individuals, not just for reproduction, but for companionship and emotional support. As he spoke, Jake's hand found hers, and Zara marveled at how different his skin felt, soft where hers was smooth, warm where hers was cool. The contact sent strange sensations through her nervous system that were definitely not documented in any Valdris medical text. "This feeling," she said quietly,